Thank you everyone for coming to the talk. If you haven't read the title yet, here it is on the screen. It's a little bit clickbaity, I'm realizing that now, but I'm hoping by the end of the talk you'll have learned some things along the way. So, what is about to proceed is a lot of kind of like functionality, some programming transformation languages, some code snippets. So it's a little bit daunting at first. I'll try and keep the energy high, I'll try and keep the excitement flowing, so please bear with me. If it stops, then just wave your hands, we'll get excited, we'll keep going. So, a little bit of a bio about myself. I don't really have LinkedIn, so this is as close to it as you'll get. Basically, unapologetically, I'm a hacker. I live, love, and breathe this space. Over the years, I've changed the type of hacker I am. I started out as kind of like a lot of people in pen testing roles in a black box point of view, just kind of spamming everything. Throw it into a parameter, throw it into an endpoint, and hoping for the best. Started doing that in red teaming where you kind of just do this at scale. But really, I found my home in the last year. And it's at watchTowr here in Singapore, which is an attack surface management platform. So basically, I spend my days looking at large attack surfaces of different companies, what sort of products and appliances they have exposed. If they have a sort of product that has an end day in there with no POC, I'll go away and develop the POC for that. I'll spend some time looking for 0 days and try and pop it in that way. Over the last year, I've had quite a string of luck, I'd say. You can see in the bottom left in the recent hit list, we've hit some big names. IBM, QRadar, Sang4, SSL VPN, Palo Alto, End-Day, we just popped recently, and OpenCMS as well. So I suggest having a look at the blog and maybe you'll learn some extra stuff along the way. And that's me. So, today we're going to talk about deciding how to pawn your own government or an enterprise, but please bear in mind this is educational. I kind of don't suggest anyone does that. So when you're looking to target an enterprise or an organization, you kind of have to decide about what sort of appliance or product you want to look at, right? And I kind of split it into 2 categories in my mind. You have those appliances out there, and then you have specialized applications. So what do I mean by that? If we look at kind of like a generic enterprise, what it looks like, it's attack surface. You have this kind of like starting module, obviously, and then we'll branch out. So you'll see loads of logos here that a lot of you are familiar with. You've got your Progress Move It that was popped a year ago. You've got Fortinet, Juniper, Ivanti, stuff like this. Oh, and by the way, if anyone here is running Veeam in their enterprise, I suggest to go and patch it now. It got popped 2 days ago. Okay, no one running out. We're great. Cool. So other than this, right, the other kind of category of appliances or products is what I would call custom applications. Stuff that's been developed by the organization themselves or by other external vendors. Sometimes you might get lucky and it's built on top of something like a niche CMS or a niche framework. When I'm talking about these, I'm not talking about WordPress, I'm not talking about Laravel. I'm talking about things like OpenCMS, Concrete CMS. So you have to start to think about what is your target selection? Which one of these do you want to approach first? And there's an underlying theme of questions that you have to ask yourself as a 0-day researcher. You're constantly asking yourself these tiny litmus questions all along the way. So you have to think to yourself, the product I'm looking at, is it well researched? If you look at Ivanti SSL VPN, who else is looking at this? Well, it's other security vendors. It's bug bounty hunters. You're also looking at threat actors and stuff like that. They're also going into it. But we also have to ask ourselves, can we get hold of this product? Can we test it locally? Can we get the source code? Can we get it running? But also a big question you have to ask, how long will it take? Will it take me a week to get a 0-day in this product? Will it take me 2 months? Will it take me 6 months to look at it and get nothing? And so I kind of want to give a little bit of a side story. I added this to the presentation quite late, so please bear with me. It's an interesting story. True story. So about a month ago, I discovered a vulnerability in IBM's QRadar. It was a critical vuln that allowed you to go from pre-auth to an admin account. And I was getting ready to publish. It had taken me months to get to this point. It's Friday, 5 o'clock, typical security. That's when you release blogs. That's when you release payloads. That's when all the stuff comes out and ruins the world of developers. 5 p.m. Friday. So we hit the publish button, release it. Fantastic. I am ecstatic. But also I'm a little bit drained. I'm tired. After 10 minutes, my phone starts blowing up. It's Twitter, InfoSec Twitter. All of a sudden, there's so many messages flying around. I'm like, yo, I'm going viral. What the hell? It's fantastic. Everyone's reading my blog. Open up Twitter, and there I see in big bold letters, CVSS 10, Palo Alto SSL VPN. Oh my God, it's ruined my day. All of a sudden, it's taken the spotlight, and I'm like, no. So it's a little bit of dread because of this, but really the reason I'm dreading it is because I know the message in Slack is coming. He's in the back of the room. Ben, hey guys, we need this bug. Can you have a look? I'm exhausted, like I said. And Elise, my colleague, he starts to boot up the AMI and starts to dive into Palo Alto. At this point, I'm messaging my boss and say, hey, I'm a little bit tired. And he said, don't worry, I got you. I said, what do you mean? He says, I got you. So I head home from the office, and as I get home, sitting outside my front door is a crate of Red Bull. That's what he meant by he's got me. Fantastic. So I'm deciding between going to bed or cracking open the case. Of course I cracked open the case, and we cracked on. Me and Elise, we did 10-hour screen calls on Teams, and we started diving into Palo Alto. Fantastic. It was probably the best 5 days I've had in the company, to be honest. It took us 5 days consistently of hacking away at Palo Alto to get the vulnerability. And if anyone is kind of into this space, I have to tell you that there's a lot of adrenaline. It's a race. And it's not just you that's looking at it. There's other vendors across the world. There's threat actors looking for it. There's bug bounty hunters looking for it. Everyone's looking to try and get in there. So like I said, we were quite lucky, and we were one of the first to publish this, which was really cool. But also, we were able to tell our customers at the same time, not only do you have this exposed, but you're vulnerable, and we were able to do that within a very short time frame. So what is this to do with the talk? So, like I said, you end up asking yourself loads of questions. And after all the adrenaline, all of this has subsided, you have like a moment of clarity. And I start to ask myself as a researcher, could I have found this vulnerability as a 0-day? And I don't know. Absolute truth, 60-40, I think I would have found it. But for sure, to have like better odds at finding it, I know one thing is, it would have taken weeks, if not months to find this vulnerability. And you don't always have months to like dive through Palo Alto. 2-3 months as your boss say, hey, can I look through Palo Alto? Maybe we'll find something. You can't always convince that, right? But another thing, like question you get from this, right, and it's kind of a true realization I've had with both the Palo Alto bug, which was under active exploitation, and the Progress Move It bug, is that the skill set of the black hat is real. These guys are good, if not better, than white hat hackers. And it's made me really appreciate what we do. And criminality aside, you can sit there and go, some of these guys, they're really good. They're artists. So we can start to maybe move away from these type of appliances that are going to take months, and we can focus on niche applications or niche CMSs, something that's going to get me in quick. So how do you do that? First, you have to get quite good at fingerprinting. You have to understand what is the application that you're looking at. And there's a real key kind of theme here I want to highlight, which is keywords. So when I say keywords, you're not looking for things that are typically in the English dictionary. You're not looking for labs, watchTowr, Java, application. You're trying to find unique identifiers in a request and a response that will tell you what lies underneath. So here I want to show a quick example of a request and a response in my proxy. If you've never seen this before, this is on the left, the request of what your browser is doing to a server. So just by looking at this request and response of this one application I was observing, I noticed a couple things. First thing, you'll see that the cookie is set as the JSession ID. This is a Java application, right, that we're looking at. It's most likely a Tomcat application, given that it's Apache there as well. So the unique identifier here comes in 2 factors. The first part is in the URI. If you see the word Orbeon there, this is a unique word. I don't know if there's an English dictionary word for that, at least. No, probably not. And also, you can see it inside the session cookie path on the right-hand side. This is atypical of when you see like a Tomcat server. Typically, when there's like a WAR file or an application context path, it's usually in these sorts of spaces. So we're typically looking at something called Orbeon. Given it's the talk, it's most likely Orbeon. But if we look at an actual request of what's going on in your browser after you browse to the application, you're seeing this. And this is another theme I want to get into. I'm not a methodical hacker. I'm not systematic. I don't go through every single endpoint and stuff like that. I'll go on intuition. If something looks fishy to me, that's what I'm going to dive into. So your browser is sending requests like this to the server. And what you're seeing on the left is some kind of unusual XML data. For some reason, they're declaring entities inside there. There's custom tags. This is telling me these guys have implemented something completely custom that you're not always seeing. And typically, they're going to do something wrong. You can't build something that custom and get it right every time. So like I said, you have to ask yourself questions. And one of the big questions as a vulnerability researcher is, can I get hold of this software? Can I get it and run it locally? And you might get lucky. You might be super fortunate and be able to download it directly, get some kind of trial or community edition, get like an AMI on AWS. Or you might have to think outside the box a little bit. You might have to go on GitHub. Has some developer accidentally committed it? Can you use those keywords to find it? Is it on Docker Hub? And if you're that way inclined, I'm not suggesting it, maybe you'll find it on some open FTP servers or leaked directories. Depends how desperate you are. So we were quite fortunate with Orbeon. In fact, just a quick Google away, and we realized that Orbeon is just Orbeon.com. It's very easy to go to, and it comes available in 2 different editions. One is professional at 1.2K, and one is a community edition. It's also on Docker Hub, GitHub. So this was a super interesting target for me to dive into because it was so easy to get hold of. So what have they actually done? In fairness, all they're doing is complicating the form. The HTML form, right, has existed since the 90s, if not prior to that. And all it does is just submit your data over the wire. But since then, there's been more needs within enterprises. They have to add things like databases, programmatical functions, and stuff like that. So what they should have done really is just stuck with what they had here in the early 90s, which is perfect. I'm pretty sure you're not going to find remote code execution in this, but we never know. So now we're interested in Orbeon. Let's dive in. Let's keep going. What is Orbeon? So if you go on GitHub, it gives you kind of like a code breakdown of what actually lies underneath, like the types of databases, it's Tomcat war files. But I was quite interested in the stack, namely because, not just because it's Java, because it uses Scala, it uses XSLT, it uses XPL. What is that? We'll get into that. But one thing I really liked, which is on their website, is their use cases. It's the types of companies that use this product, right? It's banks, it's insurance, it's education. Like you said earlier, it's health organizations. These are critical infrastructure, critical places that we can target if we were to find a 0-day inside this software. On top of that, they had a nice little link on their website which gives us a logo of all of their customers. And this is what really fascinated me, because I love the idea that if we can find a 0-day in this product, we're popping a BBC, we're popping Pfizer, we're in Deutsche Bank. I mean, come on, there's a weapons developer, Lockheed Martin. I mean, this is amazing. This is really incredible piece of software. Obviously, if these guys are using it, then I really want to target it. Another thing that kind of like piqued my interest is if you have a little look on the MITRE website, there's actually no CVEs for this since 2010. I'm actually getting 2 things from this. One is there's been no CVEs, and 2, it's actually been going since 2010. So that means it's quite an old product. And security techniques and offensive techniques have like changed over the years. So you've got a higher chance of finding something in this software. Although saying that, I submitted some bugs to MITRE about 6 months ago and there's been no response. So yeah, it might be that. So we're going to go with Orbeon and we're going to continue. So 0-day and end-day researchers typically have their own methodology, but we all kind of have one starting point, which is enumeration of routes. And depending on the type of application, you have to start somewhere. So like in a .NET application, you'll be looking at the web config. But in a Java application, you'll be looking at something like this, which is the web XML file. And you'll find it's typically within the WAR file. So the way this works is, as you see at the bottom, you have the URL pattern, xforms renderer. If you're to make a request in your browser to xforms renderer, your request will be directed to the Orbeon servlet at the top. And so you look at this web XML file, and you build out a huge list of routes. How can I interact with this product? More specifically, what we're interested in. How can I interact with this product from a pre-authenticated perspective? Because that's what we want. We want to play with it from a pre-auth play. But Orbeon's a little bit more interesting than that. It also uses Scala, right, and XPL. So you have these kind of page flow XML files, which have different ways of routing that can be interacting with the product. So for example, in this page flow, you have this part that says file path and this regex pattern. So if you were to satisfy this regex pattern, you would actually find a different route that goes through the xforms renderer to the xforms renderer XPL file. So I've mentioned XPL a couple times, and I'm sure you're wondering what it is. So XPL was actually quite an old language. It's a XML transformation language. So in a sense, what it does is if you were to provide it with XML data, depending on the type of processor, it will change. You have input, processor, output. And I want to give you a quick example of how that looks. So you'll see here in the second line, you have a processor which is defined as OXF XSLT. You have some variables which are input, followed by some XPath data, which goes inside the input, and then you have the output. So like I said, input variables, processing, output. Very simple. So I've built a huge list of routes from the servlets and from the page flow XMLs. And like I said, I'm an intuitive hacker, right? I don't go through every single endpoint straight away. And one that stood out to me is an example application. So what am I saying? So you have a page flow here. As you can see on the second line, you have home xforms, which is modeled to example xforms.xml. So far, it's all just code, right? So let's actually have a look at it on the front end. So if you were to navigate to it in a browser, right, you're presented with these 6 demo applications. So it's not unusual for developers or vendors of different products, right, to include demo functionality or sample data, dummy data within their product, just to showcase the abilities of what the product can do. From a hacker's perspective, this is very common and a common avenue for us to find vulnerabilities. And once again, the sensors are picking up, this is going to be a route to exploitation. The one that really piqued my interest at the start is the one at the bottom middle that says XPath Sandbox. The XPath, basically it takes in XPath expressions and you can play around with them. So at that time, I'm thinking XPath, Sandbox, XPath injection, XXC. That's where my brain is going at this time. So let's navigate to the XPath Sandbox and see what it looks like. So this is it on the front end. You can see this is my local host. I'm running it locally. And you're presented with 3 different sections. You have the input, XPath, and output. So the input is an XML document. The XPath is an XPath query of that XML document. Depending on that query and the input, you have an output. So much like the XPL kind of processing, input, process, output. Very simple, right? So like I said, when you're talking about XPath, you're thinking of things like XXE, right? But also, because the input is an XML document, I'm also thinking of XXE. Now, we could spend some time diving through the code on the back end to see what it looks like. But rather than do that, let's just take some payloads from payload order things and throw it into the top. So we can declare an entity within the input, which has the file path of etc password, and just select from the XPath inside, query that using the XPath, and on the output, we've got the etc password. Fantastic. We've got local file read. Instantly, we're able to read all the local files on the system. I'd be lying if I didn't spend at least 2 days trying to escalate this to something higher, because really, the goal at the end of this is remote code execution. That's what we're going for. And like I said, pre-authenticated. So I kept playing, but I couldn't find anything like access tokens or anything in the logs that will get me any further. But it doesn't matter. Like I said, this is all intuition. At the moment, I'm thinking that this target is weakened, right? And I'm more likely going to find it somewhere else. So next path I want to talk about is XSLT. And the reason I'm talking about this is because when I actually looked at the page flow for how the XPath endpoint works, you'll see on the second line where it says page path, sandbox transformations, there's a regex pattern. It's actually not hard-coded to say XPath. So it's not unusual that when you start looking at a target application, the longer you play with it, the more intimate you become with the application, you start to discover more endpoints, more routes, stuff that's not been discovered before. And these endpoints that you're discovering after a certain length of time are more fruitful. And they're more fruitful because if you were to think of someone else looking at this application, if they had spent 4 days on this, they might not find this. They might not start testing other stuff. Well, I spent more than 4 days on it, and I discovered that actually, because of this regex pattern, there is other sub-applications you can play with. Other than XPath, you can play with schema, XPL, XQuery, and XSLT, all sorts of flavors. So instantly, my brain is like straight away diving over to XSLT, which is a different type of XML transformation document. If you've never read the research by Agari FR, which initially started around XSLT stuff, I suggest to do that. So if we navigate to it, we're presented with another page that looks similar. You have an input, you have a query, and you have an output. Except this time, the query is an XSLT style sheet. So much like the XXE, this is kind of a well-researched area, and there's payloads out there already for it. So I thought maybe I could just change the payload of the XSLT box and see what happens. So in this particular case, you're able to use the system property stuff to enumerate the underlying library. So we're able to play around with the XSLT. And as here you can see in the bottom, it's the Saxon library. So if you're that way inclined, you could go onto the Saxon website and research what type of functionality they have and see what else you can do. But we don't need to do that because it's already well researched. So I just took some payloads from online, particularly one that looks to use the runtime exec in Java to try and achieve remote code execution. I thought the XXE was easy, perhaps this will work. Unfortunately, it didn't. And I started getting errors on the front end. Just tailing the logs, we can see that external function calls have been disabled. I played around with all sorts of functions, such as arbitrary file write, more arbitrary file reads, and stuff like this, none of which would work. They kept coming back, external function calls have been disabled. So I'm screwed here. And I'm thinking, right, I spent a week on this, I need to stop. Let me reach out to Orbeon and tell them about the local file read. Let's see what they say. And they came back with an interesting statement. I won't read it all, but the gist of it is that they actually said that this was a feature and not a bug, and that it allows users to run code. I was thinking, what do you mean it's a feature, not a bug? What do you mean you can run code? Perhaps they were like thinking, oh, you can run XML code, it's allowed. But anyway, I convinced my boss to let me spend some more time on it, and maybe we can achieve remote code execution. So, next part I want to dive into is XPL itself. And this one was a bit new to me. If you navigate to it, it looks like this. Sorry, it's a little bit small on the screen. But nonetheless, you have an input, you have a query, which is XPL, and then you have an output, right? Now, the bit I was interested in is the line that's in the middle, which is a processor. So in this particular processor, it's of the type OXF XSLT. It's taking in a style sheet and then processing that, and then there's some kind of output. So I thought to myself, what other processors are there? So I dived through the source code. And I found an I found a file inside the source code, which is processors.xml, and it contained 129 different processors. At this point, I'm ecstatic, right? Because it happens that sometimes when you look for an application, you'll find 1 or 2 extra endpoints. But to find 129, I'm like over the moon. There's such a high chance of finding something of like value in here. We're going for RC. It's going to happen. And the way these processes are laid out is quite cool. So if you look at the top one, you'll see OXF XSLT maps to the Saxon library. Well, we've already established that. Looking a little bit further, I found an interesting one called unsafe Saxon. Oh my God. This is obviously what was preventing the security mechanisms before to stop me from doing arbitrary remote code execution and stuff like this. So perhaps I could just use this and get RCE. But why do that? Let's keep looking through the processes. Perhaps there's something in there called execute processor. Oh my God, of course it's the execute processor. That's how we're going to get RCE. So interesting with this one is that it actually doesn't map to a library. It maps to a class path. So it's custom by Orbeon themselves. Maybe this is what they were talking about. I don't know. So let's look at the actual class itself. And I just realized that maybe it's a little bit small as well. But I will kind of hype up where it is. So in the top part, you'll see an import, which is of the Apache exec task class. This is already quite well known for like getting remote code execution. I'm also seeing variables in there referenced as std_in, std_out, and std_error, right? Like at the moment, I'm hyped. I'm thinking, cool, this is how I'm going to get remote code execution, but I don't know if I can reach it yet. So I fire up a debugger, and I add my breakpoint to this class, and I call this processor. And thankfully, I get a little callback that tells me that the processor works. So we can change processors. So how do we get the payload to work with the execute processor? Now, I could learn how XPL works and dive through there, but why do that when Orbeon themselves present a nice little example of how to use the execute processor? Of course they do. So having a look is quite straightforward. Like I was talking about earlier on, you have the processor, and you define that there. In this particular case, you have an input, which has an executable. Now, in this example, they use Windows. I don't know why. We live in 2024, so we're using Unix. So we can change the executable to binsh. We'll change the directory to something like tmp, where the application can write, and do something malicious within the arg lines. And as you're seeing at the bottom, you're seeing references to those variables that are in the class that I spoke about, std out, std error, right? So we put it all together, and we throw it in, and it's a little bit small, sorry. We achieve remote code execution. We do uname-a, and we get the output in the bottom. Fantastic. I am absolutely over the moon. All those company logos that we saw before, Lockheed Martin, Deutsche Bank, BBC, fantastic. Who cares? We're in. It's done. Fantastic. I'm super excited. But I started to wonder about the response I got back from Orbeon. What do they mean that they're aware of this? So they had something in the documentation which I think is interesting. They say for production that you can safely remove these features, and inside there, they're showing some demo form resources. They're not saying in big red letters, you should remove this. You don't remove this, you'll get popped, right? No, they don't do that. They just say you can remove it. And a short Google Doc away, a short Fofa Shodan search away, we realize that a lot of people that use this product are poppable because they don't follow this rationale. So we informed Orbeon, we spoke to them, and we said, hey guys, a lot of your customers are actually exposing this. Perhaps you should think about removing it. And they did. They rolled out 2 patches, one which was the patch DXXE itself, and the second one was to address the demo applications. And just to highlight the response they came back to us with, the whole purpose of the sandboxes is to allow remote code execution with a little smiley face. Fantastic. We were ecstatic about this. Now, I wish I had the receipts for this, but Orbeon actually had a demo website themselves in their own infra, which exposed this. No, they patched it since. Never mind. Now, the lifestyle of end-day, zero-day researchers, you can maybe tell, is filled with like adrenaline and caffeine and stuff, and it's important every now and then to stop and go outside. And I've got my little dog here that I show that reminds me to go and touch grass. This is Biscuit. Anyway, you've been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'm here.